You know that feeling when you get your paycheck, watch it hit your account, and then watch it disappear within 48 hours like some kind of magic trick you didn't sign up for? Like you're making decent money, maybe $75,000 a year, maybe even six figures. You're not broke by any reasonable definition, yet somehow, by the third week of every month, you're calculating whether you can afford to get gas or if you need to wait until Friday. Here's something that's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about your finances. According to recent data, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And before you assume it's just people working minimum wage jobs, here's the part that's actually disturbing. Over 50% of people earning six figures are in the same boat. My name is Mike, and I spent way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why people who make objectively good salaries somehow end up just as broke as people making half as much. If you've ever wondered why making more money doesn't actually feel like having more money, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps explain what's actually going on. Now, before we dive into why this is happening, let me ask you something. When was the last time you got a raise? Maybe it was 5%, maybe 10% if you switched jobs. You probably felt pretty good about it for exactly one pay period. Then something weird happened. That extra money just kind of vanished. Your lifestyle absorbed it like a sponge. Suddenly you're spending $200 more per month on things you don't even remember buying, and that raise that was supposed to change everything has changed absolutely nothing about how stressed you feel about money. This isn't a personal failing on your part. This is one of the most well-documented psychological phenomena in behavioral economics, and it's destroying the financial futures of millions of Americans who think they're doing everything right. The truth is, there are specific mathematical and psychological mechanisms that cause your expenses to rise in perfect lockstep with your income. And once you understand how these mechanisms work, you'll see exactly why someone making $120,000 feels just as financially stretched as someone making $60,000. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will probably surprise you. The problem isn't that you're spending money on stupid things. The problem is much more insidious than that. It's that our entire economic system is designed to extract every additional dollar you earn before you even realize you're spending it. Today, I'm going to walk you through the exact mechanisms that keep high earners trapped in the paycheck to paycheck cycle. And I guarantee some of this is going to make you angry because you'll realize how much money has been quietly bleeding out of your finances in ways you never noticed. Let's start with something that most people completely misunderstand about making more money. When you get a raise from $60,000 to $75,000, you don't actually get $15,000 more per year to spend. That's not how any of this works, but it's exactly what your brain assumes is happening. Here's the brutal reality. That $15,000 raise gets sliced up before it ever reaches your checking account. Federal income tax is going to take about 22% of that additional income. State taxes in most places will grab another 5%. Social Security and Medicare will take 7.65%. Before you've made a single spending decision, your $15,000 raise has been reduced to about $9,500. You went from thinking you had an extra $1,250 per month to actually having about $790. That's a 37% reduction before you even started. But wait, it gets worse. When your income increases, all kinds of things that used to be subsidized or discounted suddenly become more expensive. Your health insurance subsidy might decrease or disappear entirely. If you have kids, you might lose eligibility for certain tax credits. Your student loan payment might increase if you're on an income-based repayment plan. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. This is exactly what happens to millions of Americans every single year. They get a raise, celebrate for about 5 minutes, and then watch in confusion as their actual financial situation barely changes. Let me give you a specific example that shows how insane this gets. Imagine someone making $55,000 per year who gets a promotion to $75,000. Sounds life-changing, right? Here's what actually happens to that extra $20,000. Federal and state taxes take roughly $6,800. They move into a slightly nicer apartment because they can afford it now, which costs an extra $400 per month, or $4,800 annually. They upgrade their car because the old one doesn't match their new position, adding $200 per month in payment and insurance. That's $2,400 per year. Their health insurance subsidy drops, costing them an extra $150 per month or $1,800 per year. We're already at $15,800 of that $20,000 raise gone, and we haven't even gotten to the subtle lifestyle inflation that's about to happen. This is what I call the income illusion. Your nominal income went up by 36%, but your actual discretionary spending power might have increased by only 10% or less. Meanwhile, your brain is operating under the assumption that you have significantly more money, which leads to spending decisions that feel reasonable but are actually destroying your financial progress. Now let's talk about the mechanism that really ruins people. And it's so subtle that most people don't even know it's happening until it's too late. Lifestyle inflation, or what economists call lifestyle creep, is the tendency for your expenses to rise automatically whenever your income increases. And here's what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't feel like overspending. It feels like finally living the life you deserve. When you were making $45,000, you drove a 10-year-old Honda, bought the cheap coffee, and considered a $50 dinner a special occasion. You told yourself, once I'm making more money, I'll be able to afford nicer things. Then you start making $75,000, and suddenly those nicer things don't seem extravagant anymore. They seem appropriate. The $40,000 car seems reasonable for someone at your income level. The $6 latte on the way to work is just part of your morning routine. The $200 dinner once a week is how you unwind from your stressful job. None of these individual decisions seem irresponsible. In fact, they all seem perfectly justified. You're making good money, you work hard, and you deserve to enjoy it. The problem is that these small upgrades compound into a lifestyle that costs exactly as much as you make, no matter how much you make. Here's what's really fascinating about lifestyle inflation. Research shows that people tend to increase their spending by approximately 50 cents for every additional dollar they earn. That might not sound too bad until you realize what it means over time. If you get a $10,000 raise, you'll unconsciously increase your annual spending by about $5,000. You'll tell yourself you're saving the other half, but that other half is going to taxes and the other hidden costs we talked about earlier. The end result is that you're still living paycheck to paycheck, just with nicer stuff. But here's where the psychology gets really interesting, and this is something that most people never realize until someone points it out. The things you upgrade to aren't one-time expenses. They're recurring commitments that lock you into higher spending forever. When you upgrade from a $30,000 car to a $50,000 car, you're not just spending an extra $20,000 once. You're committing to higher insurance, higher maintenance, higher registration fees, and higher replacement costs for years to come. When you move from a $1,500 apartment to a $2,200 apartment, you're not just spending an extra $700 this month. You're spending an extra $8,400 every single year until you deliberately choose to downgrade, which almost nobody ever does. This is why people making $150,000 feel just as financially stressed as people making $75,000. They've upgraded every single aspect of their lifestyle to match their income, and now they're trapped in a higher cost version of the exact same paycheck to paycheck existence. The beautiful irony is that the things you upgraded to aren't actually make you happier. Research on hedonic adaptation shows that people return to their baseline happiness level within a few months of any lifestyle upgrade. The nicer car feels amazing for about 6 weeks, and then it just becomes your car. The bigger apartment feels luxurious for a month, then it just becomes your apartment. So you've permanently increased your expenses without permanently increasing your happiness. You're working just as hard, feeling just as stressed, but now you need every single dollar of your higher income just to maintain a lifestyle that doesn't even bring you more satisfaction than your old one did. Now let's talk about something even more insidious than lifestyle inflation. And it's a category of expenses that most people completely overlook when they're trying to figure out where their money is going. I call this invisible expense creep, and it's the slow accumulation of small recurring charges that individually seem insignificant, but collectively drain thousands of dollars from your income every year. Think about all the subscriptions you're paying for.
Not just the obvious ones like Netflix and Spotify. I'm talking about the meal kit service you signed up for and forgot to cancel, the gym membership you haven't used in 8 months, the premium version of some app that you could easily use the free version of, the cloud storage subscription that's renewing automatically, the Amazon Prime membership that made sense when you signed up but is now just enabling impulse purchases. Studies show that the average American is paying for 12 recurring subscriptions, but when asked, they can typically only name about 7 of them. That means there are 5 subscriptions actively draining your bank account right now that you're not even aware exist. And here's what makes this particularly brutal for high earners. When you're making good money, you stop paying attention to these small charges. A $15 monthly subscription doesn't seem worth the mental energy to cancel when you're making $8,000 a month. But when you're paying for 15 or 20 of these things, suddenly you're spending $300 to $400 per month on services you barely use. That's $3,600 to $4,800 per year, gone for nothing. But subscription creep is just the beginning. There's also what I call convenience inflation, and this one is absolutely destroying high earners who don't even realize it's happening. When you're making more money, you start valuing your time differently. You tell yourself that it doesn't make sense to spend an hour cooking dinner when you could just order delivery and spend that hour working or relaxing. So you start using DoorDash or Uber Eats a few times a week. Except those few times a week cost you an extra $600 to $800 per month compared to cooking at home or picking up the food yourself. That's $7,200 to $9,600 per year on convenience fees and delivery markups. The same logic applies to grocery delivery, hiring people to do tasks you could do yourself, buying prepared foods instead of ingredients, and using services that save time but cost money. None of these decisions are individually irrational. Your time is valuable, but the cumulative effect is that you're spending thousands of dollars per month on convenience without ever sitting down and deciding whether that's actually the best use of your money. Here's something that's going to sound harsh, but I need you to hear it. When you're living paycheck to paycheck despite making a good salary, you don't actually have the financial freedom to buy convenience. You've just convinced yourself that you do because your gross income seems high enough. The person making $90,000 who's spending $800 a month on food delivery isn't making a financially sound decision. They're making an emotionally driven decision that feels justified because their salary seems like it should be able to absorb these costs. But when you're still stressed about money at the end of every month, clearly it can't. Then there's the social spending trap, which is particularly brutal for people in certain income brackets. When you start making more money, your social circle often changes. You're spending time with colleagues who have similar or higher incomes. They suggest going to nicer restaurants, taking weekend trips, attending expensive events. And because you're making good money, you feel like you should be able to participate. But here's what's actually happening. You're benchmarking your spending against people who might have different financial situations than you. Some of them might have family wealth, no student loans, or a partner who also earns well. You're trying to keep pace with people who are playing a completely different financial game, and it's silently bankrupting you. Research shows that people tend to spend more when they're around others who spend more. It's not even a conscious decision. It's social conformity playing out through your credit card. You justify the $200 dinner because everyone else is ordering appetizers and cocktails. You'll agree to the $3,000 weekend trip because you don't want to be the person who can't afford it. These social expenses can easily add up to $1,000 or more per month for people trying to maintain social standing with peers who have higher incomes or lower expenses. That's another $12,000 per year evaporating into thin air. Let me show you exactly how all of this comes together with a specific example that's going to make everything click into place. Let's take someone making $85,000 per year. That sounds like solid middle-class income, right? Should be enough to save money, build wealth, and not stress about finances. Here's what actually happens to that $85,000. Federal income tax takes about $13,000. State and local taxes grab another $4,000. Social Security and Medicare take $6,500. We're already down to $61,500, and they haven't spent a single dollar yet.
That's $5,125 per month in take-home pay. Now let's look at where it goes. Rent or mortgage in a moderately priced area is probably $1,800. Car payment and insurance is $550. Student loan payment is $400. Health insurance and out-of-pocket medical costs average $350. Groceries and food cost around $700. Utilities, internet, and phone run about $250. Gas and transportation costs are $200. That's $4,250 per month on absolute necessities. They're left with $875 per month, which sounds like it should be plenty for everything else plus savings. But then reality kicks in. Subscriptions and memberships cost $150, clothing and personal care average $200, home maintenance and household items run $150, social activities and entertainment cost $300, and let's say they're being responsible and putting $200 per month into retirement. We're at $1,000 in monthly expenses, which is $125 more than they have left. So they're already going into debt by $125 per month just maintaining a totally reasonable lifestyle. But wait, we haven't even accounted for the irregular expenses that everyone has. Car repairs and maintenance, medical expenses beyond insurance, gifts for birthdays, weddings, and holidays, travel to see family. These irregular expenses easily average another $200 to $300 per month when you spread them out over the year. Now we're in the hole by $325 to $425 every single month, despite making $85,000 per year and living what most people would consider a pretty modest lifestyle. This is how someone making good money ends up living paycheck to paycheck. It's not because they're buying stupid stuff they don't need. It's because the gap between gross income and actual discretionary spending power is enormous, and most people never sit down and calculate it accurately. Here's what really drives this point home. If this person wanted to actually save $500 per month for emergencies and future goals, they would need to cut $825 to $925 from their monthly spending. That's 16 to 18% of their take-home pay. They need to make significant lifestyle changes just to achieve what should be a basic level of financial security. And this is why people stay trapped. Making these cuts feels like deprivation when you're earning $85,000 per year. It feels like you shouldn't have to drive an older car or live with roommates or skip social events when you're making that much money. But mathematically, those are exactly the kinds of changes required to break the paycheck to paycheck cycle. The psychological resistance to making those changes keeps people stuck in this trap for decades. They keep thinking that the next raise will fix everything, but it won't, because lifestyle inflation will eat up that raise just like it ate up all the previous ones.
Now here's the part that's going to really mess with your head. This problem actually gets worse as you make more money, not better. You'd think that someone making $150,000 would have an easier time saving money than someone making $75,000. After all, they're bringing home roughly twice as much, right? Wrong. The data shows that people earning $150,000 to $200,000 are nearly as likely to be living paycheck to paycheck as people earning $50,000 to $75,000. How is that even possible? It comes down to what economists call the marginal propensity to consume. Basically, for every additional dollar you earn beyond your current lifestyle, you tend to spend a predictable percentage of it. But here's the twist. When you're making more money, the things you inflate your lifestyle with tend to be much more expensive. The person making $60,000 might upgrade from a $25,000 car to a $35,000 car. The person making $120,000 upgrades from a $35,000 car to a $60,000 car. The person making $60,000 moves from a $1,200 apartment to a $1,600 apartment. The person making $120,000 moves from a $2,000 apartment to a $3,200 apartment. Notice the pattern? The absolute dollar increase in expenses is much larger for the high earner, even though the percentage increase might be similar. This is compounded by what I call lifestyle bracket creep. Once you start earning above certain thresholds, you're suddenly expected to participate in more expensive versions of everything. Your company has networking events at expensive restaurants. Your colleagues take ski trips and golf outings. Your neighborhood has social expectations around landscaping and home improvements. These aren't frivolous expenses in the traditional sense. They're often legitimately connected to career advancement and professional relationships. But they're still expenses that scale up dramatically as your income increases. There's also what researchers call positional spending, which is spending money specifically to signal your status or success to others. The luxury car, the designer clothes, the expensive watch. These purchases are much more common among high earners precisely because they're using consumption to communicate their economic position. A person making $50,000 doesn't feel pressure to buy a $70,000 car because it would be obviously beyond their means. But a person making $150,000 might feel like that car is justified or even expected as a visible marker of their success. The result is that high earners often have much less financial flexibility than their income would suggest. They're locked into expensive housing, expensive cars, expensive childcare, expensive schools, and expensive social obligations. Their higher income is entirely absorbed by their higher fixed costs. This is why bankruptcy rates among six-figure earners have been increasing. When a financial shock hits, a job loss, a medical emergency, a divorce, they discover they have almost no buffer despite years of high income. All that money went to funding a lifestyle that could absorb every dollar they made. But perhaps the most powerful force keeping people trapped in this cycle isn't mathematical at all. It's psychological, and it has to do with how your self-image becomes tied to your income and spending. When you start making good money, something shifts in how you think about yourself. You're no longer the person who has to budget carefully and make sacrifices. You're someone who's successful, who's made it, who can afford things. This identity shift is incredibly powerful, and it makes it almost impossible to make rational financial decisions. The person who's carefully budgeting and saying no to expensive purchases isn't just saving money. In their mind, they're also admitting that they haven't really made it yet. They're acknowledging that they're still financially vulnerable. And for many people, especially those who grew up without money, this feels like failure. So instead, they spend money to prove to themselves and others that they're successful. The spending isn't really about the things they're buying, it's about reinforcing an identity as someone who has money. This is why you see people making $100,000 per year who are somehow in more financial distress than people making $60,000. The person making $100,000 is spending money to maintain an identity as a six-figure earner, while the person making $60,000 has given themselves permission to live within their means without seeing it as a reflection of their worth. The identity trap is particularly brutal because cutting expenses feels like admitting defeat. Downgrading your apartment isn't just a financial decision. It's publicly acknowledging that you couldn't actually afford the lifestyle you were projecting. Selling the nice car isn't just about saving money. It's about showing up to work in something less impressive and wondering what your colleagues will think. This psychological barrier keeps people locked into expensive lifestyles long after they've realized those lifestyles aren't serving them financially. They're literally choosing ongoing financial stress over the temporary discomfort of admitting they overspent. So how do you actually break out of this trap? Because complaining about the problem doesn't help if you're still living paycheck to paycheck despite making good money. The first step is accepting a truth that most people resist with everything they have. Your income doesn't determine your lifestyle. Your lifestyle is a choice, and that choice has consequences. Someone making $150,000 who's living paycheck to paycheck isn't a victim of their circumstances. They've made a series of decisions, mostly unconscious, to spend exactly as much as they make, and the only way to change the outcome is to make different decisions. This starts with calculating your actual discretionary income, not what you think you have available, what you actually have after taxes and truly fixed expenses. Take your gross income, subtract all taxes, subtract housing, subtract minimum debt payments, subtract insurance, subtract basic food and utilities. What's left? That's your actual financial decision-making space. For most people, this number is shockingly small. Someone making $90,000 might discover they only have $1,500 per month in truly discretionary spending. That's the money available for everything else: retirement savings, emergency fund, entertainment, clothing, subscriptions, convenience spending, social activities, and any lifestyle upgrades. When you see it laid out like this, it becomes immediately obvious why you're broke. You're trying to fund a $3,000 per month lifestyle with $1,500 per month in discretionary income. The math simply doesn't work, no matter how much you want it to. The second step is ruthlessly cutting expenses that don't actually improve your life. And I mean ruthlessly. Cancel every subscription you didn't use in the last 30 days. Every single one. If you need it later, you can always resubscribe, but the default should be cancellation, not continuation. Stop eating out for convenience and start meal prepping like your financial life depends on it, because it does. The difference between spending $800 per month on food delivery and $400 per month on groceries is $4,800 per year. That's real money that could be going toward actually building wealth. Downgrade your car. I don't care if you think you deserve a nice car because you work hard. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't afford the car you're driving. Sell it, buy something reliable but cheaper, and redirect the payment and insurance savings toward actually fixing your finances. This is where most people quit. They hear this advice and immediately think of reasons why it doesn't apply to them. They need the nice car for work. They don't have time to meal prep. They already cut expenses to the bone, even though they're still paying for 6 subscriptions they forgot about. But here's the reality. If you're making good money and still living paycheck to paycheck, you have lifestyle expenses that need to be cut. The only question is whether you're willing to experience the temporary discomfort of making those cuts in exchange for the permanent improvement to your financial situation. The third step is building an actual gap between your income and your spending. Not after you get your next raise, right now, with your current income. This requires what I call the reverse budget. Instead of budgeting for expenses and hoping there's money left over, you decide how much you're going to save first. Then force your expenses to fit within what's left. If you're making $85,000 and taking home $5,100 per month, decide right now that you're going to save $1,000 per month. Not try to save it, not save it if there's money left over. Actually save it first, before you pay for anything else besides your most essential fixed costs. This forces you to make real decisions about what you can actually afford. You can't afford the $2,000 apartment and save $1,000, so you live in the $1,600 apartment instead. You can't afford the $550 car payment and save $1,000, so you drive the paid-off car instead. These aren't fun decisions, but they're the decisions that separate people who build wealth from people who spend their entire lives making good money and having nothing to show for it. Look, 78% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck despite good salaries isn't an accident. It's the predictable result of a system designed to extract every dollar you earn through taxes, lifestyle inflation, invisible expenses, and social pressure. But understanding the system doesn't absolve you of responsibility for your own financial situation. You're living paycheck to paycheck because you're choosing, whether consciously or not, to spend every dollar you make. The good news is that if it's a choice, you can make a different choice. You can calculate your real discretionary income, cut the expenses that don't actually matter, and build a gap between what you earn and what you spend. Will it be comfortable? No. Will your friends understand? Probably not. Will you feel like you're depriving yourself? Almost certainly, at least at first. But you know what's more uncomfortable? Being 55 years old, making 6 figures, and realizing you can't afford to retire because you spent 30 years funding a lifestyle that never made you happy anyway. The math doesn't lie. Either your expenses are less than your income or you're slowly going broke. Everything else is just emotional justification for choices that don't serve your future self. Start making different choices today because the next raise isn't going to save you. Only you can do that.